Shalom. Welcome to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein from the Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines, Jewish Community Relations Director. And this is The World in 5 Minutes. This week, the big news is Habemus Papam. There is a pope for the Catholic Church. The Pope Francis I is from Argentina, the first Latin American pope, in fact, the first pope from the Americas at all. And the Pope has a relationship, a well-established relationship with the Argentinian Jewish community, something that we can talk about later, and Mark and I will discuss in the show, the implications of this Pope's appointment on relations between the Jewish community and the Catholic Church, and on a number of different events around the world. In addition, Habemus Coalition. Shortly after the white smoke was seen over the Vatican City, the Israeli government announced that basic agreement had been reached between Likud Israel Beitenu, Yesh Atid, Jewish Home, and Hatnuah to form a 68-seat coalition, which is one of the smallest coalitions that you will see. This coalition excludes the Haredi parties, and this coalition is one that is seen to promote secular ideals and secular issues, and it's going to have a very significant effect going forward, at least potentially have a very significant effect going forward on the way of life for many people in Israel. President Obama is scheduled to visit Israel in the very near future. In fact, next weekend, is that correct, Mark? He's coming next week. So he'll be there Wednesday, and there are all kinds of interesting questions and issues about what is going to be going on during his tour there and what he's going to be discussing with the various sides. It's very important. It's the first time he's gone as President of the United States. He went a couple of times prior to being President of the United States, but whenever a president visits the region, this is a big deal. And people are anticipating significant developments coming out of this. One of the things that must be said about presidential visits to the region is it's impossible to overstate the hopes that come out of such a visit, and very likely that such hopes will not be met, because when your hopes are extremely high, the reality is generally not going to meet with what you expect. But we hope going forward that something of significant value comes out of the president's visit to the region, and it's not being done just to say that the president visited the region. There are people who would like that too, but it would be nice if other things would go on. And because there's so much going on in the region right now, with Syria deteriorating, major problems in Egypt, which we can get to later on, economic problems as well as governance problems, with a potentially deteriorating situation with Iran, security-wise, as far as the fact that negotiations seem to be going nowhere. There's a lot for President Obama and the leaders of the region to talk about beyond anything having to do with the peace process. And finally, I just returned from the Sudan Emergency Action Summit, put on by Act for Sudan. My organization here, Help Nuba, as well as the organization that we created here called the United Sudanese and South Sudanese Communities Association. We're part of the conference in Washington, D.C., in which we talked about the current situation in Sudan, the situation of ongoing genocide in the southern part of Sudan, and what appear to be failed negotiations that are likely to go nowhere. Mukesh Kapila, one of the former director of refugees for the United Nations, who was at the conference, said basically when he visited the region that half the children were in a severe state of malnutrition and the other half were starving. there is a serious situation going on there. Because Mark and I both do significant advocacy for the Sudanese and South Sudanese communities, pro-democracy communities, and trying to overcome oppression, we will be talking about that as we go forward with this show in the weeks and months ahead. That is The Week in 5 Minutes. Thank you for joining me today on Understanding the World.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
I'm Brian Leach, owner and general manager of Service Legends. I brought along a couple of the home comfort heroes.
Hi, I'm Tammy Wells.
I am Nick Wondershide.
I'm administrative manager
I am the senior technician
from Service Legends.
It seems like every good thing, when you feel it to the bone that it's good, there's a lot of hard work put behind it. I don't think that you can fake it and have it turn out good.
You know, if we seem like, okay, that's just weird, it's just a furnace, why would you believe so deeply in a furnace? It's not just that, you know, we want to show the world that you can have good service.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be, it's your home.
You know, it's built into our daily trainings, it's built into our culture, that we're gonna do whatever it takes to have each client say they love us, period.
That's why we spend all the hours in the training that we do. And if we guarantee it's going to be a good experience for you, or else it's free, what type of work do you think we're going to do?
There is a guarantee.
Temperature selection guarantee, fixed rider it's free guarantee, comfort guarantee, best value guarantee. All of these guarantees hold us accountable to ensuring that we exceed your expectations. And if for whatever reason we'd fail and we can't make it right, we guarantee all of those guarantees with a 100% money back guarantee.
I mean, if you don't think that your technician can fix it right, are you gonna say that to a client? No.
You don't have to worry about having a technician come to your house.
We drug test, background check all of our team members. We put safe people in your home. Each and every one of our service techs, 400 hours a year in training.
You tell it the minute they walk in the door. They know what they're doing, they've done their homework, and they actually truly care about what you want.
Because at the end of the day, you're the person that makes sure I have a job.
They're gonna be listening. They're gonna wanna know what your challenges are. Then they're gonna come and give you options, and you get to choose.
If I'm there to help and I make it easy and painless, I did my job right that day.
Well, when it comes to your comfort, safety, and your family, you know, you don't necessarily go buy the most expensive, but you get the most bang for your buck.
Oh, it's worth it, because there's a lot of people that will find a way to get it to work right now and then leave and then come back, charge you again, and the cycle just repeats itself. So when I'm out there looking at the furnace, I want to find why it failed today. How can we change the part today with something that you're not going to have to worry about? Is it worth changing the part today? I mean, you can put a lot of money into a furnace. I can fix parts all day. There's good job security in that for me, but is it the right thing for you?
I get a lot of the phone calls of after the technicians are there. They're just in awe. They're like, wow, you guys are great. I mean, I don't even know what to say. You guys are great. Everything you did was perfect. It was great.
Keep going though, I like this.
Just give us a try. I'm gonna take all the risk.
I've got the time to make this right. I've got the support to make it right.
Just check us out.
And if you don't see the value in what we do,
I mean, fixed rider, it's free or 100% money back.
enough said.
Shalom. Welcome back to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein today, and we have quite a bit to talk about. First, I'd like to thank our sponsor, or benefactor, Dr. Ronald Bergman and Bergman Folkers Cosmetic Surgery and Spa for their support of our show today and their support of what we do, allowing us to share news and information, and in future shows, having other guests on as well from around the world. So yesterday, the big news was that Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio of Buenos Aires became Pope Francis I, elected by the College of Cardinals. And just a little background on who he is. After the dust settled from the election of Benedict XVI. This is actually from the National Catholic Reporter online. After the dust settled from the election of Benedict XVI, various reports identified the Argentine Jesuit as the main challenger to then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. One cardinal later said the conclave had been something of a horse race between Ratzinger and Bergoglio. And an anonymous conclave diary splashed across the Italian media in September 2005 claimed that Bergoglio received 40 votes on the third ballot just before Ratzinger crossed the two-thirds threshold and became pope. Back in 2005, Bergoglio drew high marks as an accomplished intellectual, having studied theology in Germany. His leading role during the Argentine economic crisis burnished his reputation as a voice of conscience and made him a potent symbol of the costs of globalization can impose on the world's poor. Bergoglio's reputation for personal simplicity also exercised an undeniable appeal. A prince of the church who chose to live in a simple apartment rather than the archbishop's palace, who gave up his chauffeured limousine in favor of taking the bus to work, and who cooked his own meals. Born in Buenos Aires in 1936, Bergoglio's father was an Italian immigrant and railway worker from the region around Turin. He has 4 brothers and sisters. His original plan was to be a chemist, but in 1958 he instead entered the Society of Jesus and began studies for the priesthood. He spent much of his early career teaching literature, psychology, and philosophy, and early on he was seen as a rising star. From 73 to 79, he served as the Jesuit provincial in Argentina. Then in 1980 became the rector of the seminary from which he had graduated. He was named auxiliary bishop of Buenos Aires in 1992 and then succeeded the ailing Cardinal Antonio Corancino in 1998. John Paul II made Bergoglio a cardinal in 2001, assigning him the Roman Church named after the legendary Jesuit Saint Robert Bellarmino. Over the years, Bergoglio became close to the Comunione e Liberazione, a movement founded by Italian Father Luigi Guisani, sometimes speaking at its massive annual gathering in Rimini, Italy. Bergoglio is certainly a conservative in fact, unwaveringly orthodox, according to this article, on matters of sexual morality, staunchly opposing abortion, same-sex marriage, and contraception. In 2010, he asserted that gay adoption is a form of discrimination against children, earning a public rebuke from Argentina's president, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner. He's shown compassion for victims of AIDS, and he worked with the Jewish community in response to the 1994 bombing in Buenos Aires of a 7-story building housing the Argentine Jewish Mutual Association and the delegation of the Argentine Jewish Association, one of the worst ever anti-Jewish attacks in Latin America. In 2005, Rabbi Joseph Ehrenkrantz of the Center for Jewish Christian Understanding at Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut, praised Bergoglio's leadership. He was very concerned with what happened, Ehrenkrantz said. He's got experience. And we see yesterday that around the world, various Jewish organizations issued statements of support, praising this pope as someone with whom the Jewish community looks forward to work. Mark, do you have anything to add to that?
Essentially, you know, the conjecture was that any new pope would not have ties to the history of the Jewish people with regard to the Holocaust, such as the previous number of popes had. And this is not proven true. The fact is the new Pope Francis, I don't think you call him Francis I until there's a Francis II, by the way. So the new Pope really has ties to Europe and to the history, and he's 76 years old, meaning he has an understanding of World War II.
He's Francis I, I think, is what his title is, from what I understand.
You can't.
I think they're assuming that someone's going to come after.
Wow.
And there's interesting discussion about who he's named after. There's a Francis Xavier who's kind of one of the major Jesuit priests, and I think he may even be the founder of the Jesuits. Well, and he's also certainly Francis of Assisi for his work for the poor. So there's some belief that he may have been named after both of them rather than just one of them, but we shall see when he gets a chance to speak out about his work.
But the fact is he's been very cordial, apparently, to the Argentinian Jewish community, which is a community that has been under stress for various reasons, economic and because of the bombings there. And I think it bodes well for good Catholic-Jewish relations. I
think absolutely. The people that I've talked to and those I've seen write so far seem to believe that this is a pope that understands what's going on with the Jewish community and what's going on in the Jewish world, and he has an understanding of Jewish history. Potentially because of his experience in Germany. When you take theology in Germany, you're kind of in the middle of that.
Absolutely.
And then when you go back to Argentina and experience it firsthand with an attack on the Jewish community yourself, I think that elevates his understanding of what the threats that the Jewish community faces, even over and above somebody who grew up in Europe and only knows the history.
It would seem that he's going to be a sort of a transitional pope again because of his age, necessarily.
That's true. And another thing that's interesting is I saw a report that he only has one lung.
Oh,
so
right?
he's not a fully healthy 76-year-old either. But this is somebody who evidently has been dynamic, who has been able to bridge a lot of chasms in his life, and I think will in fact not only help the Catholic community transition into a world in which half the Catholics in the world live in Latin America, but also this pope seems to be more in the spiritual pastoral mode and less in the purely academic mode, even though he is an intellectual.
Yes.
And so I saw some commentary that was saying that is also a transition that is going to be undertaken by the Church under this pope. And I think it's a challenge in a lot of religious traditions.
The balance between academicism and spirituality, perhaps, eh?
Which is an interesting transition as we get to the Israeli coalition.
What's the link, David?
Well, what the link is that the religious parties in
Yes.
the Israeli governmental structure are no longer part of this coalition for the first time in many, many, many years.
Okay, let's go over the basics again. We're looking at a 68-seat coalition.
Out of 120. So in order to have a coalition that is stable at all, you have to have 61 votes.
Okay, and the opposition will be the Labor Party and whoever they could cobble together.
Well, the opposition is fairly significant. The opposition is the Labor Party and Meretz,
yes,
the Arab parties,
right,
and the religious parties.
Right.
What this means is on many issues there's going to be significant opposition because the Orthodox, the Haredi, I should say, the Haredi parties will oppose anything that takes away the welfare portion of religious support, something I think this coalition is basically designed to do, and also anything that threatens abandonment of religious settlements, which is going to be another interesting issue. I don't know where Shas and United Torah Judaism are going to come down when all things are said and done, because they're so angry at Jewish Home.
Yes, but it looks like somebody from Jewish Home got the Ministry of Construction, which deals with settlements per se.
Yes, so we have a situation in which the right-wing party that supports Israel maintaining all of the settlements,
yes, is in the coalition,
is in control of settlement construction. And people don't understand. For the vast majority of Israelis, the issue of settlements and the peace process is not the highest issue. In fact, one of the biggest issues in this election is the education ministry, because for many years the education ministry has been in control of the religious elements.
Yes.
And right now, the education ministry is going to be under control of Yesh Atid.
Yes.
A secular centrist party.
And behind that was the behind-the-scenes fight to try to at least share power within that ministry. And Yesh Atid, which lost many battles, succeeded on that particular front.
And so one of the big issues is they want secular subjects taught in all the schools, so that you can't have schools that are not training Israelis to function when they get out of school, which is what's been going on. There's an idea, just to let you know, there's a situation in Israel right now where the Haredi schools, the ultra-Orthodox religious schools, are designed in such a way that the students go through and they get a religious education that does not allow them to function in secular society when they graduate. They're not able to move on to higher education. They're not able to do most jobs. And so essentially, Israel has a full-on welfare class that's supported by the state, the vast majority of whom are in this religious mode. They're people who believe that the state should support them because of their religious studies and their worship. And the secular Israelis have decided enough is enough, essentially, in this election. And they don't want to do this anymore, including the right wing. So even a Jewish Home on the right wing, which is a secular-ish right-wing party, decided that the Haredim need to do national service. And working along with Yesh Atid on the centrist party, decided that not only do they need to do national service, either military service or other forms of serving the government for a couple of years and paying off their education to the government, or they need to actually learn things like math and English, things that enable them to function when they get out of school and get jobs.
Let me put that in concept for a second, that the flagship institution of modern orthodoxy in the United States, Yeshiva University, theme is Torah u'Mad'a, meaning both Torah and science. And so within the modern orthodoxy, science is present, but not in the Haredim, which is further stringent.
And this is a country whose economy is significantly based on high tech. And the jobs are requiring a higher and higher level of math and science education in order to be able to function. And in fact, many of the military jobs are now requiring a higher level of that too. Israelis don't just line up with musket and bayonet and march into battle. You actually have to have real education in order to serve in the military. You have to have understanding of language. They have to be able to interact with Jews, Arabs, tourists, everything else at their regular basis. Russians, Africans. If you speak Yiddish and that's it, you're not able to really function in that environment. And so language becomes a big part of it. Whether you're dealing with the police forces, you're dealing with firefighting, or you're dealing with anything else, in order to function in any of those jobs, you need to have linguistic skills. You also need to have math and science in order to be able to get the jobs. And the Haredi schools that are focusing on the religious education are just not meeting that. And so what's happening is that when the students graduate from the Haredi high schools, their options are to continue on in the higher Haredi education and become basically rabbis, or to go on welfare and create children. That seems to be the options here, and those are not good options. Israel is looking at an increasing number of people who cannot support themselves and who are expecting the secular population who's working to support them. And Yesh Atid and Jewish Home basically said enough is enough. We don't care if these people are supportive of the right-wing political agenda vis-a-vis foreign policy. We are looking at the potential collapse of the country if the economy falters.
Yeah, they need to be functional members of society. Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about a situation in this country where we're worried about sequestration and 2% cuts in budgets, and they're sitting there looking at this vastly, dramatically growing population of welfare, people who need welfare support, who have absolutely no chance of helping the economy no matter what they do going forward.
So just to repeat, that the functioning underpinning of this election was based on economics and social social issues rather than the peace process.
Absolutely, overwhelmingly so.
Yeah.
This election was not about the peace process. Now, there is some focus on the peace process coming from Hot-Nuah and Tzipi Livni, and a little bit from Yesh Atid as well, and the desire to restart a peace process. But that's where we are. We're not talking about continuing an existing peace process, removing roadblocks from a peace process. We're talking about restarting a peace process, starting a new peace process. And that is something that's multi-steps away. The primary focus of this coalition is really on the economic and social situation of Israel, in which you finally crossed a threshold in this conflict between what the ultra-Orthodox and Haredim want and what the secular population of Israel needs. The secular population of Israel has won the day, and that is going to be the governing of the coalition. We'll be back just after this.
If Tom Coates from Consumer Credit of America was your personal webmaster, Tom would filter out all bad debt emails. If Tom was your mailman, you'd never get any debt reduction junk mail. If Tom Coates was a lineman, he'd block any phone calls offering to reduce your credit card debt.
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America, and we're still your best choice for credit counseling. We're local, we're accountable, and we can do more. You make the call when the time's right for you.
When it comes to competition, there really is none for Consumer Credit of America.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Drink, dance, party. Kitty's is the ultimate dance club in Des Moines. A huge dance floor with room to move, 3 bars to keep your drinks full, and kickin' DJs playing all your favorite dance music. At Kitty's, we've always got your birthday party planned with Birthday Fridays. That's right, when your birthday rolls around, there's only one place to go. Gather up your friends and head to Kitty's, where you drink free on the Friday of your birthday week. Find out more about Birthday Fridays at kittiesusa.com. Kitty's, all kinds of people, all kinds of music, all kinds of fun.
Drug and alcohol addiction slowly steals a person's identity, tearing away pieces of their life little by little until one day it seems like the hope of a happy future is gone and there's no chance of getting it back. Here at St. Gregory Retreat Centers, we can assure you that there is hope. Our unique approach to recovery begins with the understanding that the dysfunction and damage caused by addiction can be overcome, not just dealt with. Don't let another day go by. Call St. Gregory today.
Whether you're 10, 25, 50, 80 years old and beyond, everyone needs to live within their means. I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America. For almost a quarter of a century, we've helped people of all ages learn to manage their personal finances to benefit them far into the future. When problems arise, we've got the experience you need to make those debt problems go away. Got financial problems? Call Consumer Credit of America.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Shalom. Welcome back to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein of the Jewish Community Relations Commission. And Mark and I were talking about the Israeli coalition. In addition to what's going on with the Israeli coalition, which is going to be finalized in theory beginning of the week, we have the president coming to Israel midweek. Just as Israel is preparing for Passover, we have President Obama coming to the King David Hotel, and he's going to be eating kosher for Passover food, is what I understand, because they will have already koshered their kitchen. Thomas Friedman had an interesting article this week, and I think it's worth mentioning at least part of it. I tend to disagree with Thomas Friedman a lot of the time on what he expects Israel to do, but I think his analysis of the current state of American disinterest is a significant one. So this article is from March 12th, so Tuesday. It's called Mr. Obama Goes to Israel. And he says, in case you haven't heard, President Obama leaves for Israel next week. It's possible, though, that you haven't heard because it's hard for me to recall a less anticipated trip to Israel by an American president. But there is a message in that empty bottle. Little is expected from this trip, not only because little is possible, but because, from a narrow U.S. point of view, little is necessary. Quietly, with nobody announcing it, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has shifted from a necessity to a hobby for American diplomats. Like any hobby, building model airplanes or knitting sweaters, some days you work on it, some days you don't. It depends on your mood, but it doesn't usually matter when that sweater gets finished. Obama worked on this hobby early in his first term. He got stuck as both parties rebuffed him, and therefore he adopted, quite rationally in my view, an attitude of benign neglect. It was barely noticed. Well, the issue here is I don't really think that this trip to Israel by President Obama is about the peace process. I really don't. I don't think he's going there in order to attempt to restart the peace process. I think he's going there, as we said last week and the week before, to address the situation of Syria and Iran and potential U.S. action in the months ahead that could severely impact both the Palestinians and the Israelis and has nothing to do with the peace process.
Well, it's really hard to tell because even though the itinerary is fairly well known at the present time, the motivations have not been fleshed out, and multiple motivations for going. For various reasons, to placate, to assure, to strengthen various themes within the complex plate of what the Middle East is all about.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who think that the president is going because in his second term you work on your legacy. But I can tell you the last president who tried to work on the Middle East as his legacy was Bill Clinton, and he wasn't exactly thrilled with the outcome there.
But, you know, there's a means built into the itinerary, it looks like, to make certain things equivalent. There'll be a 5.5-hour meeting that's scheduled with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, and a similar 5.5-hour meeting scheduled in Ramallah with President Abbas. So there's some sort of an even-handedness that he wants to apparently convey to both parties.
Well, I would agree with that. It's just, you know, the Israelis and the Palestinians. I mean, the Israelis and the Obama administration have already met multiple times in the recent weeks. When during the AIPAC conference, you had Ehud Barak meeting with American officials, and Michael Oren meeting with American officials. Whatever's been going on in American Israeli policy circles here has not been not had the same amount of support on the Palestinian side.
Well, no, and there's reasons for that. And Tom Friedman's contention is that both sides have dissed the president. You know, on one hand, perhaps you can say that, but on the other hand, Netanyahu complied, at least initially, with the request, for example, to free settlements for a 10-month period, and nothing happened at that time. Yeah. So those who are critical of the president would say, please don't equivocate all these messages.
Well, you also have a situation in which the president seems to want to support people's right to self-determination, okay? And we've talked about that before. But the issue here with the Palestinians is whose right of self-determination is going to be respected in developments of the Palestinian-Israeli peace process.
Meaning Fatah or Hamas?
What I mean here is it's difficult to figure out. In fact, it's not difficult to figure out. There's pretty much an assumption here that Fatah is functionally a dictatorship over the West Bank. They won an election 8 years ago in which they were supposed to be in power for most 4 years, and their allies throughout the Middle East were the nationalist dictators who've been removed in country after country after country.
Right.
It's fairly clear that the majority of Palestinians do not support Fatah. They may support, whether they support Hamas or not, we don't know, but to argue that allowing Fatah to create a state, allowing the Palestinian Authority leadership to create a state, therefore represents Palestinian self-determination is already highly questionable.
Especially if they can't come into that position accounting for Gaza.
Yes. And Well, I mean, not only that. I mean, you could just call Gaza a separate state at this point, and you still have the same problem. There's a question of whether or not they even control the majority of the West Bank, as whether or not they're supported by the majority of the population of the West Bank.
The general consensus is articulated by Shimon Peres, the president of Israel, is that Abbas is a good guy and his heart is in peacemaking. So regardless of any information to the contrary, that's the prevailing scenario.
So let's assume, and so this is the second situation. Yeah. Let's assume that Abbas is interested in making peace.
Okay.
Let's just start there for a second.
Okay.
Let's assume that Abbas is interested in making peace. You have the issue of whether or not the majority of the Palestinians in the West Bank support him. There's pretty much an assumption right now that the majority of Palestinians as a whole do not, at least within Gaza and the West Bank, because the overwhelming percentage in Gaza support Hamas, and a significant portion of the West Bank, if not the majority of them, support Hamas.
Well,
we don't know yet. But
let's assume that he has at least nominal support from the West Bankers.
Okay, so let's go forward and let's assume that Abbas has 95% support of the West Bank. Everybody in the West Bank supports Abbas.
Okay.
Abbas is a nationalist. Okay, well, like I said, we've seen all of these one after the other governments, nationalist governments falling to Islamists. We're in a situation in which the United States has supported the Islamists in almost all of these countries. And Barry Rubin wrote an article about this exact thing that we can talk about in a minute here. The Israelis have a serious concern that Hamas could take over the West Bank.
Yes.
So we're in a situation here in which pushing for peace right now, even if Fatah is 100% behind the peace, even if Abbas is completely reliable as a partner for peace, the likelihood here is that essentially Hamas will end up taking over the West Bank.
But
and the Israeli security situation becomes very problematic at that point.
Those who would support Abbas would say that it's the American and Israeli responsibility to do all it can to prop the fellow up.
And so the question was, what does that? And my argument would be that a failed peace negotiation would be the biggest threat to Abbas, not the biggest help to Abbas. In other words, advancing the peace process right now is much more threatening to Abbas than it is helpful, because there's almost no chance of it going anywhere.
So therefore, I think the president's trip is mostly symbolic on that level, regardless of what he talks about Iran and Syria. That the symbolism is to put his eggs in the basket of supporting the establishment of a Palestinian state, which in certain ideologies would say, well, they got a state, well, then they will live up to its responsibility.
Well, and that's certainly a possibility. And then the question is the president really going and saying, oh, but as part of this discussion, how do we maximize observer state status? I've talked for quite a while at this point, and I've written several articles about this. The fact is that observer state status, while the Palestinians shouldn't have pursued it for any number of reasons, observer state status solves a lot of the problems that are impacting the peace negotiations and are impacting the relations between the peoples.
But the way you interpret it is going to be different than most people hear that. Can you just summarize what are the positives of that?
So what I see as positives for observer state status are that the security situation for Israel is maintained at a very high level. Israel controls the external borders, which means you're not going to have rebels and militants and huge amounts of arms and other things coming in from Jordan across the border into the West Bank, and therefore they can't be used against Israel from the West Bank. You're going to have a situation in which, therefore, the internal border can be made more lax, allowing or more relaxed, allowing for more cross-border interaction between the West Bank and Israel.
In other words, you're saying with independence comes responsibility.
Well, with independence comes responsibility, but what I'm saying is with security situation, Israel does not need to have as high a level of security if it's controlling the external border as if the Palestinians are controlling the external border. And that allows for much better relations between the two countries. The situation that comes up then is what territories does the Palestinian Authority end up controlling? What happened in my mind is that the Palestinian Authority made a enormous concession in seeking observer state status instead of holding out for full state status. Because observer state status, as I've said in multiple places, makes sense as potentially a final status situation for the West Bank because of the fact that if you look at the consequences for full state status for the Palestinians, they're actually much worse than the observer state status is. There is no way that right now that the life situation, the living conditions of the average Palestinian living in the West Bank are going to be better with full state status than they will with observer state status. Because observer state status is going to dramatically improve their security. It's going to dramatically improve their economic situation, allowing cooperation across borders. And without that, you end up with a situation like Gaza, in which Israel has to basically shut down the internal border. You'd have no tourism, basically, or very limited tourism between Jerusalem and Bethlehem, even, because the border would be shut. So the Palestinians are looking at a situation in which moving forward toward full state status is actually a severe challenge. The Israelis are saying, well, look, how do we concede new territories to the Palestinians when they have nothing left to give us? The biggest concession they could possibly have offered for a significant amount of territory being shifted to the control of the Palestinian Authority would have been accepting observer state status. And they didn't do that. And so now the Israelis are in control of territory and saying, well, we want to give them territory, but we don't have any way, they don't have anything to exchange for it.
Well, they do. They have legitimacy that they can exchange for it. But
yeah, but look, legitimacy, this is a very, very subjective issue. I mean, okay, so President Abbas, who believes the Holocaust didn't happen, is going to say, oh, I believe the Jews have a right to a state? Okay.
Well, he has to.
I mean,
at some juncture he
has to, but does he actually believe it?
What do you care if he believes it?
And if the government's overturned, Hamas takes over, then what? The fact that Hamas doesn't believe it? I mean, the reality here is whether or not the issue of recognition of a Jewish state is really about refugees. It's really about the refugee situation and not expecting return of refugees to the land of Israel. Well, that's part of it.
I have a slightly different take on it. It has to do with accepting the permanency of State of Israel.
I mean, I think if the issue is ending the conflict, I would go there. I think what you really want to say. If I was an Israeli, what I would want to hear is that whatever solution comes up is the end of the discussion. That we're going to accept the situation as developed after the peace negotiations. That Israel is here, the Palestinians are here, and that's the end of the discussion.
It could be, but that's not the only way to get there. And certainly, I think most Israelis would like to hear that they understand that they're going to teach their kids to accept peace with Israel as Israel is.
Well, look, there's no doubt that for the two sides to be able to exist moving forward,
they have to
that
accept
educating
each other.
toward peace is a vital thing. The Israelis have been doing that by and large. I mean, there's certainly pockets where I'm sure that's not happening.
Yeah.
But the national curriculum is, and that's part of what Yesh Atid wants to work on, because they want to get all the radicalism in the ultra-Orthodox institutions out of the educational curriculum. There's not much there outside the Haredi curriculum anyway, but I think that's part of it, and educating towards sanity. But the situation, I think, is one in which the Palestinians need to start seeing the advantages of working with Israel, whatever that entails. Instead of just working with Israel on a security situation, they need to understand that they can work with Israel on an economic situation. Because working with Israel economically is going to be the best thing for the development of the West Bank and for the future of the Palestinian children.
Well, look, that's an obvious observation, but apparently it's not been on the table in their mentality. What can I tell you?
Well, and this is part of why observer state status means so much. And I think that the Palestinians took observer state status because they believed they could use the ICC to go after Israel,
right, yes.
And that's just pure idiocy. It really is. I mean, we can talk more about that in detail, but that makes no sense. If that's really what they promised their population that they would do with observer state status, they have done real harm to the understanding of what the purpose of observer state status is.
David, look, the assumption is the Palestinians and the Israelis have a workable philosophy and a strategy and a goal. And there's been enough criticism on both sides to show that neither side has been particularly progressive, realistic, and persistent.
Realistic.
Realistic.
That's what we want to talk about. Being coming to a realistic perspective of what is possible.
And so do you think President Obama has in mind to sit down with the two parties and say, let's look at something that's realistic?
Let's look at something, and I do think that that's where it is. I think the president over the years has made a point of saying that Israeli security is paramount and that the peace agreement is not going to weaken Israeli security. Well, there are only certain things that could be done realistically to ensure that and to create a Palestinian state. And in my mind, they are much closer to observer state status than full state status. And we'll talk more about it after the break.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
If Tom Coates from Consumer Credit of America was your personal webmaster, Tom would filter out all bad debt emails. If Tom was your mailman, you'd never get any debt reduction junk mail. If Tom Coates was a lineman, he'd block any phone calls offering to reduce your credit card debt.
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America, and we're still your best choice for credit counseling. We're local, we're accountable, and we can do more. You make the call when the time's right for you.
When it comes to competition, there really is none for Consumer Credit of America.
Drink, dance, party. Kitty's is the ultimate dance club in Des Moines. A huge dance floor with room to move, 3 bars to keep your drinks full, and kickin' DJs playing all your favorite dance music. At Kitty's, we've always got your birthday party planned with Birthday Fridays. That's right, when your birthday rolls around, there's only one place to go. Gather up your friends and head to Kitty's, where you drink free on the Friday of your birthday week. Find out more about Birthday Fridays at kittysusa.com. Kitty's, all kinds of people, all kinds of music, all kinds of fun.
Drug and alcohol addiction slowly steals a person's identity, tearing away pieces of their life little by little until one day it seems like the hope of a happy future is gone and there's no chance of getting it back. Here at St. Gregory Retreat Centers, we can assure you that there is hope. Our unique approach to recovery begins with the understanding that the dysfunction and damage caused by addiction can be overcome, not just dealt with. Don't let another day go by. Call St. Gregory today.
Whether you're 10, 25, 50, 80 years old and beyond, everyone needs to live within their means. I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America. For almost a quarter of a century, we've helped people of all ages learn to manage their personal finances to benefit them far into the future. When problems arise, we've got the experience you need to make those debt problems go away. Got financial problems? Call Consumer Credit of America.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Shalom. Welcome back to Understanding the World. I'm Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein, the Jewish Community Relations Director for the Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines. And we've been talking a little bit about the peace process, or lack thereof, or hopes for peace, the future of peace, whatever you want to call it, Mark. And there was an article in the paper, in the New York Times recently, that just basically talked about whether or not Israel even has a right to exist as a Jewish state. You want to talk about that?
Yes. Professor from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, Joseph Levine, who has been very active pro-Palestinian activist over the years, published something in the New York Times. And when anything gets into the New York Times, it becomes first-page reading for a lot of people who follow the Middle East crisis. Joseph Levine, with all sorts of caveats, essentially said that Israel has no right to exist as a Jewish state because, in essence, it would, by being a Jewish state, by favoring one ethnic majority, it denies the self-determination of others in this state. Joseph Levine's article has been roundly criticized from both left, right, and center, mostly center and right, for doing several different things. First of all, by not looking around the world and figuring out that at least 50 other states of the Islamic nation and the 22 Arab states are indeed in the same position, and by criticizing only Israel, sets himself up for criticism as being anti-Semitic. Now, Gil Troy, who's a centrist, T-R-O-Y, came out with an article this very morning, indicates that, look, essentially what Joseph Levine did is he accused only one nation in the world of not being the United States, and that nation would be Israel. And that, on the other hand, look, Israel can be a functional and happy and effective Jewish state and democracy because of its pledge in Israel's Declaration of Independence. And the fact is, it works this way to the benefit of all its citizens, not only Jewish citizens. That the fruits of the Declaration of Independence have brought non-Jews, Arabs, to power in the Supreme Court, in the Knesset, in many public and professional careers, and you don't find that across the Middle East.
Well, and there are a couple of other things that are I think fairly ridiculous that continue to be mentioned as arguments. The people who make this argument end up sounding as if it would have been better for Israel to have ethnically cleansed itself of its Arab population, and that if only Israel were all Jewish and all European,
then it could be justified.
It would be justified in calling itself a Jewish state. So therefore, if you want to create a state for your own ethnicity, just get rid of the minority population. I mean, this is absolute ridiculousness, and if the United Nations or any other self-respecting anti-genocide groups were to argue that, they should be thrown out of office. I mean, we're looking at a situation in Sudan where this is exactly the case. The government wants to get rid of its minority population. Let's just expel all the Christians. You know, the government of Sudan calls the Christians South Sudanese because there's now a Christian state. So the United Nations is gonna stand up and say you can't be an Islamic state because you have minority population. Why don't you try telling that to the rest of the Arab world? I mean, this is ridiculous. It's an absolutely absurd argument.
It's non-realistic.
It's not only non-realistic. It's a hate-filled argument.
It's a hate-filled article that has nothing to do with the peace situation in the Middle East, in which there exists a Jewish state, and in which the attempt now is to form a two states for two peoples formula. And by the way, that formula is endorsed by AIPAC.
Yes, I mean, and the other issue is that you're dealing with a situation in which there has to be some basis for the way that country works, and why should Israel be based on a secular model based in Christianity? Why can't it be a secular model based in Judaism? That for sure makes sense to me. As far as the issue of is Israel a homeland for the Jews? I think that's up to Israel, personally. I don't think that's up to anybody else.
But that's indisputable. The fact it was created as a homeland for the Jews.
Well, it was created as a homeland for the Jews, but I think at this point it's also up to the people who live there. I mean, at this point, the people who live there are the ones making that determination. Israel exists as a state. In 1946, we could talk about Israel being created as a state for the Jews.
Yeah.
In 2013, Israel is a homeland for the Jews because the government of Israel says that it is.
And most Jews who live there want it to be.
Absolutely, but it has nothing to do with what I think. It has nothing to do with what somebody in the New York Times thinks. It has nothing to do with somebody in anywhere else in the world thinks. If the Israelis say this is a homeland for the Jews, it is just as much a homeland for the Jews as if the United States says we're the home of the free and the land of the brave.
Okay,
there's no difference there.
The ramification that is, if Jewish sovereignty reigns in Israel, it has the right to build in the legislation that will enable Jews from all over the world to come and gain immediate citizenship. And the Arabs hate that.
Well, look, it doesn't really matter whether the Arabs hate it or not. It'd be like populations in the United States.
That's true.
Saying, I mean, think about this. In the United States, it'd be like there are people who want to have immigration reform that allows people who come from Mexico to become citizens of the UnitedTes more easily, and then there are people who want them all expelled.
Yes.
I mean, and so
well,
you know,
the implication.
The situation is this. You either have to have a policy that makes some sense as to what your national needs are, or you can have racist policies. Now, the racist policy says that you don't welcome anybody into your country and you try to expel everybody. The Israeli government could very easily say, we don't want to accept any refugees whatsoever, none at all, and we're going to make it very uncomfortable for minorities to be here. They could go to that extreme. They could say, we're not gonna have a democracy in which everybody is equal. We're going to have a democracy in which some people are superior to others. And guess what? The vast majority of democracies around the world have that as their policy. They don't have full equality in everything. The idea that what Israel does is not somewhere on the spectrum of being, fully free democracy to being somewhere reasonable is just not true. Israel's democracy is certainly on the more progressive, liberal end of democracies in the world, period.
Absolutely. Now, the intent, however, of people who push this idea that there cannot be a Jewish state legally simply want to undercut the sovereignty of the Israelis to be able to promulgate those type of legislations that enable Jews to come there.
I think what it is, what they really want to argue, Mark, is not about Israel. It's about a single state solution. What they really want to argue is that there's no right Israel should not have the right to define its borders or even negotiate the borders with the Palestinians, because the Palestinians should be citizens of this country. And therefore, this argument of this is a Jewish state versus a Palestinian state is the null and void argument.
Well, that's the first level argument, and I agree with you. The underlying impetus is to push for a one-state solution. But if indeed it's shown that Israel is an illegitimate state, that leaves the door open to this one-state solution.
Well,
and the fact is, a lot of people, even around here, are pushing this. You cannot have a Jewish state idea simply because they want to push for the one-state solution.
Well, the situation is one in which my belief is that realism always gets in the way of the utopians here. Okay,
well, that's true.
The reality here is
Yeah.
security is the primary issue. And if security is the primary issue, the one-state solution is never going to be a possibility. It's not a possibility in any way, shape, or form. The Palestinians right now have a choice between negotiating for observer state status, functionally, full observer state status, using it the way it should be used, with Israel controlling the borders and the Palestinians having control within those borders, or opting for full state status and ending up forcing Israel to take security measures that will dramatically worsen the way of life in the West Bank. I mean, I think that's their alternative. They got a fly in here. I think the long-term situation is one in which, as Ehud Barak noted in his speech, at some point Israel will simply unilaterally decide what it will keep and what it will not. And if the international community forces that upon Israel, it will be much worse for the Palestinians than what they can negotiate. And those who argue that it's only Israel that needs to negotiate right now are missing the point. We're out of time for this week. Next week, we're actually taking a break because it's spring break, and we'll come back the following week and on March 28th. We hope that you will join us then. I'm sure there will be many developments over the next 2 weeks. I'd like to thank Mark Finkelstein for joining me in the studio today.
You, David.
And once again, to thank Dr. Ronald Bergman and Bergman Folkers Cosmetic Surgery and Spa for their support of the show. Wish you a wonderful, wonderful spring break. And because Passover is coming right after spring break, a Chag Sameach and happy Passover to all. Thank you.